Oh, the fun things that you can make with upcycled jeans. I'm Jan Howell. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm all about upcycling, crafting and sewing and other DIY projects around the house, giving you tips and tricks on how to make these tasks easier and maybe even save you a little money. In this three-part series, I'm going to show you how to make a DIY denim quilt with upcycled jeans. I've been saving jeans for a while now. I've made a few of these blankets and it's time to make another one. So I thought it would be great to show you the process while I'm doing it. These denim quilts are cozy. If you've never slept under a denim quilt, you're in for a treat. They also make great picnic blankets and wedding gifts. They're durable, warm, and very easy to make. This is a great project for a beginner. I'll be giving you lots of tips and tricks throughout the videos, so make sure you watch the whole thing. In this first video, I'm going to go over how to cut out your squares, give you some tips on that, and how to put all these blocks together to make your quilt top. In the following videos, I'll be going over how to put the backing on, get it ready for either quilting or using your sewing machine to quilt your blanket. And then I'll be going over how to bind your blanket. So all this will be covered in 3 separate videos. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it. Let's go over the materials and items that you'll need. Now, of course, you're going to need jeans to cut out your squares with. As you can see, I have several pairs of jeans that I have saved over the years. This fabric comes in handy for so many things. If you don't have a lot of available jeans, you can ask around. I'm sure someone has a pair of jeans that no longer fits them or they want to get rid of. It's also fun to incorporate some corduroy, or if you have some durable cotton fabrics, cute prints that you want to add, you can do that as well. The squares are 8 by 8 inches. You can, of course, make them as big or as small as you want and make these blankets as big as you want. You'll need a pair of good fabric scissors. A piece of oak tag or a recycled cereal box works well for a template. You'll want it to be rigid so that you can trace around it. And as you can see, I've used this a few times. You'll need a pen. And for the backing of the blanket, you can use flannel. You could use a cotton print if you wanted to. Or what I have found is really nice and saves you a little time is to buy a good quality flannel sheet set. You can buy just the flat sheet, or you can buy the whole set. It's kind of fun to have some pillowcases to go with it. You'll probably save a little money as well, especially at this time of the year, buying a flannel sheet set. Because flannel, a good quality flannel, can be costly by the yard unless you find it on sale. I'm going to use for this blanket, so I'm going to use that because I love the print and it was a good thick quality flannel when I saw it. And so I thought it would be perfect for a denim quilt. And you'll need approximately, if you are using fabric yarded, you'll need approximately 6 yards. And you'll have to piece that together. Where if you buy a flat sheet, you're going to save the time not having to piece it together. So just something to think about. You'll need a denim sewing machine needle for your sewing machine. You want to make sure that you have a durable needle while you're sewing through this thicker fabric. You'll need a sewing machine. You can also use a serger if you wanted to. You'll need an iron and an ironing board. Depending on if you want to tie the quilt, you'll need some yarn and a yarn needle. Some folks don't use any batting in their denim quilts, but I have found that I love to use a polyester low loft batting between the fabric and the denim. It just feels a lot more cozy and not so stiff and rigid. You'll need the batting to fit the size of the blanket that you're making. The first thing that you'll need to do, of course, is cut out your squares. Now I have a tutorial. I'm not going to go into how to deconstruct a pair of jeans right now in this video. I will put the link in the description below of some really helpful tips on how to deconstruct your jeans so that tracing and cutting is so much easier. So take a watch at that if you want to first. For a finished quilt that measures 88 by 67 inches, or 244 centimeters by 170 centimeters. You will need 108 squares cut at 8 inches by 8 inches, so you'll have 12 squares by 9 squares. And I'll show you how to piece those together in just a bit. I have opened up this pair of jeans so it makes it easier for cutting out. And again, I do have that tutorial that shows you all this detailed how to do this. So on this pair of jeans, it has that Lucky brand label that I like to save, and they're just kind of fun for projects that you're giving away as gifts, not selling or anything. But so what I will do on Levi brand jeans and Lucky jeans is to unpick that tag and put it in my label to use later for other projects. They are kind of fun to add to bags and other fun projects. So I will unpick that a little later, but for now I'm going to flip this pair of jeans over to the back side and take my template. And of course you want to maximize your fabric, probably be able to get one up here. I'll take that up as high as I can, trace around the square. Another thing to do is to cut out the pocket, which is really cute to include in your blanket. You just want to make sure that you have enough for a seam allowance above this bulky part, because you don't want to be making a seam on this bulky part. So I do have a good seam allowance there. So this won't be quite on the grain, but that's okay. I'm just going to eyeball that, make sure I have enough space, and trace that out. Just keep tracing and cutting until you have as many squares that you need and want. A helpful tip when you're cutting out your squares, so you're not counting all the time, like you have a stack and you're like, well, how many do I have now? How many do I have now? Is to, once you have 10 squares cut out, put a piece of scrap piece of paper on top of that stack, cut out 10 more, put that down, put another paper, so that you can count out increments of 10. It just makes it so much easier because you're not going to have to keep counting and counting over and over again, which I did for a while. What is really nice is when you're cutting these squares out, I pull my husband into the project and we take a night and I clear off my big table and we get out my stack of jeans, and one person is opening up the jeans, getting them ready to trace. One traces and one cuts, and it goes so much faster. And it's kind of fun, and you can take your time doing this over a longer period if you wanted to. Now see how I'm butting up the edges of the line with the edge of the template, and also, if you can, butt it up with this side so you just have to make one cut. So you could set out your table, grab some jeans, put on a good movie, and get cutting. And that's what that pocket will look like. We have enough for the seam allowance. And it's good to use a different variety of shades of denim as well, if you can. Now this stack doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be in this order, because I am going to adjust the strips that you'll be making. This is just for counting. So once you have your 108 squares cut out, it's time to put it all together. Now you can just randomly sew them together, or you can lay them out on the floor. I like to lay them out on the carpet so I can get an eye of where the dark pieces are, and you don't want to put too many pocket pieces together in the same place. So it's kind of nice to just lay those out. I have cut out all my 108 squares and a few extra just in case I want to switch things up a little bit. I have moved my dining table out of the way. I have vacuumed and cleaned my floor so that I can lay things out and get a view of what it looks like and switch it out as I want to. We're going to be making 12 strips with 9 squares in them. You'll want to grab a few little pieces of paper. I'm just using these sticky notes so that I can pin them to the top of each row. So let's go ahead and lay these out and see what it looks like. You can just throw all the squares out and adjusting them to your liking. Okay, so I have them arranged like I want them. Now we're going to put them in rows of 9. So these are the rows of 9. Take the top one, place it on top of the other, and I'm just going to, in that order, going to bring it back up here and label it row 1 and pin it in place. Start with row 2. Now I have my denim squares in order. Let's go back to the sewing room and I'll show you how to put them all together. We are ready to stitch these pieces together. I have threaded my machine with a blue thread and my bobbin has blue thread in it. I am going to change my needle to a denim needle. That's really important, or you may have your needle breaking when you're sewing through this thick fabric. If you do have a walking foot on your sewing machine, I would go ahead and use it. It does feed the fabric through a lot smoother, but if you don't have one, no worries. You'll be fine. I am using a 100 denim needle. I have removed my universal needle from my sewing machine, and if you haven't seen my needle sorting pincushion tutorial and pattern, you might want to check that out. It's really handy and nice to help you remember what needle you just removed from your sewing machine, so that when you go to use that needle again, you can easily at a glance know what needle that is that was in your machine and that you can reuse this. I do recommend changing out your needles if you do sew a lot. It does help make the stitch a lot nicer. So I'm going to put in my denim needle and thread it. We're going to start with our first row. I like to place my stack that I'm working on to the right of my machine. Then I can just grab one, place it down. I have set up a guide. I'm using a 3/8 inch seam allowance instead of the usual 1/4 inch for quilting. And I do that because sewing on denim, it gives me a little bit more wiggle room and a little bit more space on that seam, which comes in handy for sewing on these bulky fabrics. I'm using a regular stitch of 2.5, a regular straight stitch. And my machine has a nifty feature where if you're sewing on repetitive seams and you want to set it, you can set it to back stitch at the beginning and the end of the seam, and also cut the thread, which is really handy. If you don't have this feature, no worries. Just make sure that you're back stitching at the beginning and the end of your seam. I've removed my sticky note from my top block. I have stuck it to my sewing machine so that I can reapply it when I'm finished with this strip. Place the first block right side facing up and the next block on the stack right side facing down. Line up the edges and sew that seam. Open that up, take the next block on the stack, place it right side facing down, line up the edges, and sew that strip again. And you'll continue until you have all 12 blocks sewn together. And then you can reapply that sticky note back on the first square, pin it in place, set that first strip aside, and continue sewing all 12 strips. I have sewn the first 4 rows. I'm going to take row 1 and row 2 and sew them together. Place row 1 right side facing up, row 2 right side facing down. I find that if you press the seams open and then try to line it up, it shifts a little bit while you're sewing and it's not as accurate. I find that when you fold it like this, so I'm going to fold this seam allowance this way and this seam allowance that way. And I don't even press it at this point. I'm not even going to pin it together. I'm just going to place the seam where it comes down together. And if you can, it's just locks it in place. And then when we get all the seams done, we will press the seams open. But for now, I'm going to sew down and all my top seams will be going one direction, down the same. We're going to keep it all the same. And then on the next row, I'll show you what we need to do to keep that flat. So when I get a little closer to that seam, I'm going to flip that seam allowance down. I'm going to find my underneath seam, and the seam is flipping this way. I'm going to line that up. Now, as you can see, this is coming out just a little bit further than the rest. And that's why I love the 3/8 inch seam allowance rather than the 1/4 inch. It gives you a little play, because when you're cutting out, sometimes you don't get it quite square. So that's locked up. The most important thing is that you have that as straight as possible. We have a little overlap, that's fine. This seam's going this way, this seam's going that way. Flip the seam down, flip that seam up, lock it in place. And let me just show you what that looks like. See, that's right on. One seam going that way, one seam going that way. I'm going to continue. Okay, row 1 and row 2 are sewn together. I'm going to grab row 3, right sides together. If this one was sewn with the seam flipped down, when I sew it to the next row, this seam flipped down. If I were to flip it up, this would be twisted, and we don't want that, because that adds extra bulk and a weird feeling underneath your blanket. If it was sewn down on this side, it needs to be sewn down on this side, and it will vary every other seam. So just make sure you're sewing that correctly. So these right sides are together, the seam is down. Now this time that top seam is going to be flipped up and the bottom will be flipped down. I hope that makes sense. Now, if the edges aren't all straight and even, don't worry about it, because you're going to have that happen, because when you cut things out, especially the way we cut it, traced it and cut it, you're going to have a little bit unevenness, and that's no big deal. I'm just going to angle it off and make that straight, and then we can clip that off later if you wanted to. I have my first 4 rows sewn together. This is getting exciting. Looks like they're all lining up really nicely, and see how that works. Every other seam going different directions. So now we're going to set that first 4 bundle aside and start working on my next foursome. Woohoo! I have finished the top. Everything's sewn together. I'm going to remove all my labels. I'm going to heat up my iron and give it a good pressing. On these vertical seams, I'm going to press the seam allowance open. And the horizontal seams, they'll either go up or down. I have finished pressing all the seams open. I've also taken my rotary cutter. If there were any extending pieces of fabric, I just squared it up really nice. And now it's ready to put on the backing. Go through your closets, find some jeans that you're not using, and start cutting out squares for your blanket. I'll catch you in the next video where we'll go over how to put on the backing, some tips on what fabric to use and how to go about doing that. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you ever want to have more details and perhaps download a PDF, youmakeitsimple.com. Make sure you check that out. I usually do a blog post on each video, so you can check that out on my website. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next video.